Hi guys, thank you for being here. It's 12:30 and we are here to talk about motivation and discipline and whether we need discipline to be motivated. So it's just me today for those of you that saw my stories. So feel free to, throw in a comment or ask a question if as we're going something comes up for you. This is a really fun topic. There's no right or wrong here. I'm going to tell you from my perspective what I've seen in regards to myself and the clients that I work with, and yet everybody's got their own opinion about this. So the way that I want to start out is, does motivation require discipline? I think the first thing that we've got to do is really define what motivation means and then what discipline means so that we have the same definition as we continue the conversation. So motivation is the desire to act in service of a goal, right? So we are desiring to move forward towards something that we want, right? That's what motivation is by definition. Discipline, by definition, I thought this was really interesting, right? Because there was two definitions, and the first, I got these right out of Webster's: to punish as a way to bring about good behavior. That was the first definition of discipline, which I thought was really interesting. Punish was the second word. And then the second definition underneath it there said to train in self-control or obedience. So I don't know about you, the word punish, the word self-control training, obedience training, those are things that felt a little bit sticky to me. And I think that's where discipline and just telling people, okay, you just need discipline to accomplish a goal, can get a little sticky, and I think doesn't resonate with a lot of people. So when I began thinking about this concept, my answer to the question, does motivation require discipline, is probably it depends, right? It depends on who you are. It depends on what stories you attach to the word motivation, to the word discipline. For me, and what I have seen with my clients, there may be a different or an easier way to look at this, to really determine what's going on motivation-wise. The simple answer is, if you're not moving towards a goal, either you're not disciplined enough to reach the goal. This is what we hear since childhood. At least that's the story, right? And or you just don't care about the goal. And I think that it's a little bit more nuanced than that. I think that that's too simple for people who are complex. So the way I've broken it down is into 4 pillars of motivation. So the first pillar of motivation for me is energy. Okay, now I'm not talking about woo energy, though I have nothing against that. That's just not what I'm speaking of here. Do you physically have the energy required to do the thing that is necessary to get you to the goal? I think that's number one baseline. If you haven't slept enough, or you aren't eating things that keep you energized, if you're not taking breaks throughout the day, if you're engaging in relationships or conversations that are draining, right, then our energy wanes. It makes it much more difficult for us to motivate towards a goal. So I don't think it's that we don't want the goal all of the time. I don't think it's that we just need discipline and to kind of grit our teeth and do it. I think we need to look at, how are we getting our energy? How are we keeping our energy? How are we restoring our energy when we get depleted, right? So to me, that's the question I want you to ask yourself when you're feeling like, why am I not motivated to do this thing? The simplest answer, because this is something that comes up for a lot of people, is, in terms of exercise, right? So whenever I'm not exercising, I'm looking at these 4 things that we're about to talk about. But number one, I'm talking about, am I getting enough sleep? Am I eating things that fuel my body? Am I feeling drained emotionally or physically? and that's causing me to not want to show up. Now, that doesn't mean I can't push through it. That doesn't mean I can't utilize discipline to push through those things, but I do want to look at that. So that's number one. I think number two, we're talking about passion and inspiration. Are you passionate about what it is that you're doing? Or do you feel inspired about the step that you're about to take towards your goal? Or are you inspired or passionate about your goal? What I find is that if people can't really connect to it, and maybe they want it, but they're not quite sure why, or they think they want it, or they've been told that this is the thing that they do next. And yet they're not really connected to it. They're not really passionate about it. They don't feel inspired by what they're doing. You're going to find it really difficult to materialize motivation if you're not feeling passionate or inspired about something. So I think that is another important indicator of like, okay, what's going on here? How can I shift this so that it is in alignment with my passions, with what inspires me? Or am I fighting towards the right thing for me? So that's the second one. The third is planning and prioritization, right? So this is sort of the nuts and bolts. Have I quite literally decided this is a priority for me? And have I then planned for how I'm going to make it happen? So I think part of motivation, again, is we can have the energy, we can feel inspired towards something. And yet if we physically don't figure out how it's going to fit in our life, we're going to have a hard time getting it done because we're all busy people. We're high achievers. We're high performers. That's a hard thing for us to do if we don't take a few minutes to slow down long enough to see, all right, how are we going to implement this? How does this fit into our day, our week, our month, our year, whatever that looks like? Okay, so there's just some like nuts and bolts of have we taken the time to slow down long enough to do that, planning and prioritization. The fourth thing is boundaries and accountability. Now, those are words that get people all twitchy, right? So when we think about boundaries or accountability, really the bottom line is, have we set, Mary Beth says yes, awesome. I love that you're tracking with this. So boundaries, do we have the proper boundaries in place that will support us moving towards whatever it is that we're intending to motivate towards? It can be very unmotivating if we're feeling like we have no boundary, we have no container, we have no clear path forward. And it can feel a little bit like, okay, how am I going to get there? What's happening, right? And so sometimes narrowing that focus, really bringing the boundaries in, getting clear about, do I need to tell my family this is my goal so that they can help me hold the boundary, right? What do I need to say to them to create a boundary so that I'm going to be able to accomplish whatever it is that I want to accomplish, right? So that's the boundaries piece. The accountability is just what we talked about. So who do I need to let know? What's the external system that I can create that's going to create some accountability here? And that can be a person, but it can also just be a system, a calendar, reminder, right? Like something that triggers us to say, oh wait, we're actually motivated to get this done. And so let's make sure that we have the time in place. Okay. So 4 things, I'm going to go back, 4 pillars of motivation: energy, passion and inspiration, planning and prioritization, boundaries, and accountability. So let's circle back to discipline. In my mind, discipline doesn't necessarily play into any of those. It's really about, okay, do I have the energy? And if not, what am I going to tweak in order to make sure that I have enough sleep or the food that I need or the moving my body that I need? Okay. It isn't about let me punish myself in order to bring about this behavior. Because what happens is I think discipline works in the short term, right? So, I mean, think about it, traditional discipline with kids, right? Well, kids, I don't know about yours, but kids have the memories of like goldfish, right? And so you have to, in the moment, provide some kind of correction, right? And then they're probably going to forget it 5 seconds later. And so I think that happens with discipline when we're just kind of trying to force it. rather than really helping them go through and understand why it is that this isn't, that we're redirecting them from whatever this behavior is. When they can understand the why, and of course they've got to be older to be able to cognitively be able to do that developmentally, but like when we're able to explain and retrain their brains or our brains to think differently, that's going to have much more long-lasting effects than if we're just trying to grind and push through it in that moment and just say, this is wrong, let's course correct. So going back to all of these 4 pillars, Mary Beth says, I think energy and planning tends to be her biggest obstacles. Absolutely, right? Because if you don't have energy, let me just tell you something, planning is going to be darn near impossible, right? Because you're too tired to plan, to do the thing that you wanted to do, right? And so I think that's why energy is number 1 on the list, because if you stop at energy, it doesn't mean that some of these other things aren't an issue, but that is first line of defense. That's like foundational things that we need to work on and fix in order to move towards this goal, right? We've got to have the physical, emotional, mental energy to keep pushing forward. And no amount of discipline is really going to sustain us long term if our energy is low, right? So energy, passion, and inspiration, that's second, because if you're not aligned with what it is that you're doing, if you're not passionate about what you're doing, my question always is, why are we doing it? Let's go back to why we made this goal or why we made this plan in the first place. And are we still in alignment with it? Are we clear about why we're doing it? If we're not, we've got to go back there. So if our energy is good and yet our passion isn't there, we've got to start there. Same thing, if our energy's good, our passion's good, but we haven't planned it, we haven't figured out how to add it to our calendar, we're all busy people. If we haven't prioritized it, it's likely not going to happen. And then the last thing, the boundaries and accountability. So these are my thoughts. I'm going to be asking some questions and stories over the next week just to get your continued opinions and thoughts about motivation and discipline, because I bet that there are lots of people out here that are like, no, discipline is where it's at, and that's okay. This is just my perspective, and I feel like for those of us where discipline kind of gives us that like icky feeling, it feels good to me to have some other things that I can rely on and that I can kind of check myself against when I'm feeling that motivation. Because what tends to creep in is, am I just lazy? Do I just not know what I'm doing? Right? Am I just like, I just can't show up for myself or show up for these goals? And the truth is, that's probably not true. It's probably one of those 4 things. Cool. All right. Thank you for listening. I hope that this was helpful to you today. I hope that you have a fantastic weekend. It's Friday, and we will see you next week. Take care.